Rita was known all over town for her sharp tongue and fiery temper. No one dared to cross her, for they knew it would end in a barrage of insults and curses that could leave even the most thick-skinned person shaken. She carried herself with an air of superiority, looking down on everyone around her. Whether it was a market woman, a neighbor, or even a random stranger, she always found a way to belittle them. On a scorching afternoon, Rita decided to visit the bustling local market to purchase some food items. Dressed in a stylish but slightly gaudy outfit, she strutted into the market with her usual arrogance, ignoring the greetings from traders and passers-by. As she walked briskly, her purse slipped from her grasp, and a wad of cash fell out without her noticing. The money landed right in front of an old beggar woman who sat by the roadside, leaning on a wooden stick for support. The woman, frail and blind, instinctively reached out, feeling the crisp bills beneath her trembling fingers. My child," the old woman stammered, her voice hoarse from years of hardship. "You dropped your money." She struggled to her feet and, clutching the money, took a few shaky steps toward Rita. But before she could even speak another word, Rita turned on her with a fierce glare. "You dirty old beggar," Rita spat, her face twisted in disgust. "How dare you come near me? Do I look like someone who'd take anything from your filthy hands?" The old woman flinched at Rita's cruel words, but she tried again, her voice gentle. "No, my dear, I was only trying to—" "Shut your mouth," Rita cut her off harshly. "Go beg someone else for money. I don't have time for your nonsense." A few market women who had been watching the scene gasped in shock, whispering among themselves. "That poor old woman only wanted to help," one muttered, shaking her head. Tears welled up in the old beggar's unseeing eyes, and she began to cry softly, holding on to the money. Yet she did not move. She stood there, humiliated and heartbroken, while Rita stormed past her without a second glance. Rita continued her shopping, going from stall to stall, haggling with the vendors and tossing insults at anyone who didn't meet her demands. She bought fresh tomatoes, spices, and some rice, all the while feeling smug and satisfied with herself. But when she finally reached into her purse to pay, her expression changed. "Where is my money?" she muttered, rummaging through her handbag. Her fingers searched frantically, but the money was nowhere to be found. The vendor frowned. "Madam, are you paying or not? There are other customers waiting." "Shut up and wait," Rita snapped, her frustration mounting. Panic set in as she realized her money was missing. The murmurs around her grew louder, and people began exchanging knowing glances. Just then, the soft, trembling voice of the blind beggar cut through the crowd. "Is this the money you are looking for?" Rita froze. She turned around slowly, and there stood the old woman, holding up the cash with a quiet dignity that pierced through Rita's pride. "I tried to return it," the old woman continued, her voice stronger now, "but you insulted me. You humiliated me and stripped me of my dignity for doing something good." Rita swallowed hard, suddenly feeling a knot in her chest. A few market women stepped forward. "Apologize to the poor woman," one of them said. "Yes, humble yourself for once," another chimed in. Rita's pride flared up again, and she scoffed. "Why should I apologize? She should have spoken up sooner." The blind woman sighed heavily, shaking her head. Then, with a voice filled with quiet authority, she spoke words that sent shivers down the spines of everyone around. "From this day forward, misfortune will follow you wherever you go. People will embarrass you 10 times worse than what you did to me. You will taste the pain of rejection, and your arrogance will bring you nothing but sorrow." She bent down, dropped the money at Rita's feet, and without another word, turned and walked away. Rita stood there, her face pale, the laughter and whispers of the market crowd echoing in her ears. Some urged her once more to chase after the old woman and seek forgiveness. But Rita clenched her fists. "I don't need anyone's forgiveness," she snapped, bending down to pick up the money. "It's my money anyway." But as she rose to her feet, a sudden gust of wind knocked the bills out of her grasp, scattering them through the market. People laughed as Rita scrambled to catch them, tripping over baskets and bags. Each time she reached for a bill, someone else would step on it or grab it before she could. "You see what pride does," an elderly trader remarked. If she had just apologized. Rita, embarrassed beyond words, gathered what little she could and stormed out of the market. From that day on, Rita's life began to unravel in ways she couldn't have imagined. That night, as she lay in bed tossing and turning, an eerie sound broke the stillness of the night. A low, mournful cry. She frowned, sitting up. "What on earth is that noise?" she muttered, walking over to her window. There, perched on a branch just outside her room, was an owl with large, unblinking eyes. It let out a piercing cry, and for a moment, Rita felt a chill run down her spine. "Shoo!" she yelled, slamming the window shut. But the owl didn't move. It continued its haunting cry until the early hours of the morning. By the next day, strange events began to unfold. The first blow came when her long-suffering boyfriend, Peter, decided he'd had enough. "Rita, we need to talk," he said sternly, standing in the living room as she lazily scrolled through her phone. "What now?" she snapped, not even bothering to look up. Peter sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I can't do this anymore. I've put up with your arrogance, your temper, and your disrespect for years, hoping you'd change. But you haven't. I'm done." Her head snapped up in disbelief. "What are you talking about? You're leaving me? After everything I've given you?" Peter laughed bitterly. "Given me? Rita, all you've given me is heartache and humiliation. I deserve better. Goodbye." Before she could respond, Peter walked out the door, slamming it shut behind him. For the first time in a long time, Rita felt a pang of loneliness and fear creeping in. That night, the owl returned, its cries louder and more piercing than before. Rita tried ignoring it, but the sound wormed its way into her mind, keeping her awake until dawn. The following day, misfortune struck again. While driving to work in her flashy car, the engine suddenly started smoking. She pulled over, panicking as flames erupted from under the hood. Despite her screams for help, the car was quickly engulfed in flames. By the time the fire brigade arrived, there was nothing left but a smoldering shell. Rita stared at the charred remains of her once prized possession, her hands trembling. "Why is this happening to me?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. As if the universe heard her lament, the owl cried again that night. This time, its wails were accompanied by an ominous fluttering of wings that seemed to echo in her ears long after it stopped. The next morning, another blow came. Rita's beloved pet cat, Shadow, had mysteriously disappeared. She searched everywhere, calling his name. It wasn't until she stepped outside that she found a tuft of his fur scattered on the lawn and a single large feather lying beside it. A neighbor mentioned seeing a strange bird circling her house earlier, but no one could explain what had happened. From then on, her life became a series of calamities. She lost her job after a heated argument with her boss, something she had never imagined would happen. The landlord threatened to evict her after she missed a rent payment, blaming it on her dwindling finances. Everywhere she turned, something else went wrong. Rita began to notice a pattern. Every night the owl cried, and by the next day, a new misfortune would befall her. She got angry and decided to hire a professional hunter to shoot the crying bird down. But the days the hunter came around and hid waiting for the owl so he could kill it, the bird mysteriously would not show up, almost as if it knew their plans. But the days the hunter wouldn't come, like clockwork, the bird would cry all night long. Feeling frustrated, she got another apartment far, far away, hoping that would stop the bird from locating her and crying every night. But to her dismay, the very night she moved in, the owl cried all night. Rita sat on her new bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding with frustration and fear. "How is this possible?" she whispered to herself. "I left everything behind. How did it find me?" The next morning, she stormed into her new office, exhausted and irritable. Her new boss, a strict but fair woman named Mrs. Aid, frowned when she saw Rita dragging herself in late. "You're late, Miss Rita," she said curtly. "I'm sorry," Rita muttered, slumping into her chair. Mrs. Aid studied her for a moment and sighed. "This isn't the first time you've come in looking like this. You need to pull yourself together or you won't last here." Rita clenched her fists under the desk, biting back an angry retort. But deep down, she knew Mrs. Aid was right. The sleepless nights, the constant fear, and the growing misfortunes were taking their toll. Later that evening, she sat in her living room, sipping a cup of tea, when the familiar haunting cry pierced the silence. She dropped the cup, spilling hot liquid on herself. "Enough is enough," she screamed, grabbing her phone and calling the hunter again. "Tomorrow night, be ready." I don't care what it takes, just get rid of that cursed bird." The next evening, the hunter arrived again, armed and ready. Rita watched anxiously from her window, whispering under her breath, "You won't escape this time." Hours passed and silence filled the night. No owl. The hunter sighed in frustration. "Madam, this is a waste of time. Maybe it's just in your head." "It's not," Rita snapped, but even she felt a seed of doubt creeping in. The hunter left, and Rita locked her doors, feeling a moment of relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe the bird had finally given up. But just as she crawled into bed, the owl's cry echoed through the night, louder and more sorrowful than ever before. Rita buried her head under the pillow, tears streaming down her face. "Why won't you leave me alone?" By morning, another tragedy struck. Her new apartment complex caught fire due to a mysterious electrical fault. While she managed to escape unharmed, she lost all her belongings once again. Standing outside in her nightgown, watching the fire consume everything she had left, she finally felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her soul. Rita trembled as the old beggar's words echoed in her mind. "Misfortune will follow you everywhere you go." At that moment, she realized she had run out of options. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't fight it. There was only one thing left to do: find the old beggar woman and beg for forgiveness. Swallowing her pride, she set off toward the market, praying the woman was still there. When she arrived, the familiar stalls and vendors bustled around her, their eyes widening when they saw her disheveled appearance. "Looking for someone?" one of the women asked, smirking knowingly. "Please, Ma, I am looking for the old beggar," Rita asked, her voice cracking. "You mean the one you embarrassed and insulted and stripped of her dignity because she tried to do good by returning your money?" one of the market women said angrily, her eyes flashing with disdain. Rita stood frozen, her face pale with shock. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She started, but her voice trailed off. "I realized I made a terrible mistake," Rita finally whispered, her voice full of regret. "I just came to plead for her forgiveness and make it right by her." The crowd of market women went quiet for a moment, and then another woman, her face hard with anger, spoke up. "You came too late," she said sharply. "She died the very next day out of heartbreak for what you did to her." Rita's heart sank as her legs buckled beneath her and she collapsed onto the ground, her face contorted in agony. No, this can't be true," she muttered, her voice shaking with disbelief. The women around her shook their heads, some with pity, some with anger. "She died heartbroken," one of them said softly. "You had your chance to make it right, but you chose pride instead." Rita's sobs grew louder, her entire body trembling with the weight of her guilt. She buried her face in her hands, her tears streaming through her fingers. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I never should have treated her like that. She only wanted to help me. I didn't deserve her kindness." The women stood around her, watching her with a mixture of sympathy and resentment. They had all witnessed Rita's cruelty, and now they saw her broken. But it was too late. "You're suffering now because of your arrogance," one of them said coldly, "and no amount of crying will bring her back." Rita didn't answer. She just cried for the old woman, cried for herself, for the life she had ruined with her pride. She cried for the deep emptiness that now consumed her, for the relationships she had lost, for the destruction of her once prosperous life. For 3 days, Rita didn't move. She stayed in the market, too ashamed to show her face anywhere else. She didn't care that the sun had set and the market had emptied each night. She didn't care that her clothes were soaked with tears and dirt. She didn't care about anything except the overwhelming remorse and the haunting echo of the owl's cry that had followed her wherever she went. As the days passed, the market women grew tired of her presence but couldn't bring themselves to kick her out. Rita had nowhere else to go, and they could see the depth of her regret. She spent those days in utter despair, occasionally hearing the mutterings of passers-by who had heard of her arrogance and fall from grace. Some whispered that she deserved what was happening to her, while others, more sympathetic, said she was paying for her mistakes in the harshest way possible. But Rita heard nothing. All she could hear was her own broken heart, echoing the pain of the past and the consequences of her actions. On the third day, as the sun began to set, an older woman approached Rita. She had been one of the first to speak out against her when the market women first discovered her presence. She stood above Rita now, her expression stern but not unkind. "You can cry all you want, but you won't find peace in these tears," the older woman said. "You'll only find it when you truly change your heart." Rita looked up at her, her eyes hollow with grief. "I've lost everything." The older woman softened slightly, kneeling beside her. "You may have lost things, Rita, but you can still find a way to rebuild. You may have destroyed your past with pride and cruelty, but you can repent and choose humility and kindness." Rita swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "But how can I fix this? How do I undo the damage I've caused?" The older woman sighed. "You can't undo it, but you can try and make amends by going to the old beggar's grave and all of those you've wronged and seek their forgiveness. You can start over, step by step, even if it feels impossible, but only if you stop wallowing in guilt and begin to act." Rita nodded slowly, still crying, but now with a glimmer of determination in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The older woman stood up, dusting off her hands and returning to her business. Rita watched her walk away, and for the first time in days, she felt something other than despair, an inkling of hope. Maybe it was too late for some things, but she could still try, she could still change, and maybe, just maybe, she could find redemption. But first, she needed to make things right with the old beggar, no matter the cost. Rita heeded the lady's advice and was determined to find the old beggar's grave and plead with her. She searched tirelessly, asking around until she discovered that the old woman had been taken back to her village to be buried. The journey would take 2 days to a remote village called Eid. But Rita didn't care. What else did she have left to lose? Her life, her dignity, and her pride had all crumbled in front of her, leaving her with only one path: seeking redemption. When she finally arrived at the village, the dust from the long journey clung to her and her tired body ached. She found the old woman's family house and introduced herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came to confess, to make things right. I treated your mother terribly. I insulted her, and now I—" Her words were cut short as the family members looked at her with disgust. The anger in their eyes was unmistakable. They had already heard of Rita's actions in the market, and they knew what had transpired. One of them spoke harshly. "You should have begged for forgiveness when you had the chance. Now you will pay for your disrespect." Without another word, they led her to a small room in their house. It was cold, dark, and musty, with the faint scent of death lingering in the air. The room was where, according to their traditions, the body of a loved one would be kept before burial. The family made Rita lie in there with the body of the old woman, locking her inside. For days they refused to let her out. She was given food and water, but the space felt suffocating, oppressive. Rita felt trapped, unable to escape the weight of the past, both physically and emotionally. At night, she cried herself to sleep, her heart aching with guilt. "Please forgive me," she would whisper to the old woman's lifeless body, hoping that somehow the old woman could hear her. "I was cruel, I was blind to my own faults, but now I see." On the 4th night, as Rita lay on the cold floor, exhausted from crying, something strange happened. She heard a faint rustling sound outside the door. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been alone in the room, but now it felt as if someone was approaching. The door suddenly creaked open and a massive owl flew in, its wings flapping in the dark. Rita screamed and scrambled back, banging her hands against the door, desperate to get away. The owl hovered for a moment before it slowly transformed, its body contorting and reshaping into the form of the old beggar. Rita's blood ran cold and her breath caught in her throat. She stared in terror as the woman she had wronged now stood before her, her old eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Please no," Rita screamed, backing away into the corner of the room. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. I am sorry." The old woman held up a hand, and her voice, soft yet firm, cut through Rita's panic. "Calm yourself, child. Be still." Rita trembled, her body shaking uncontrollably. You're... Her voice faltered. "But you died. You're not real. This is just a nightmare, a punishment." The old woman sighed deeply and approached her slowly, her presence overwhelming. You thought you could escape your actions by running away, by moving to another place, but your heart betrayed you. Misfortune followed you because you refused to humble yourself. I am here because you sought me out, and you have suffered because of the pain you caused me." Rita wiped her tears, her chest heaving with emotion. I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was blind. I was arrogant. But I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't understand then." The old woman's eyes softened slightly. "You did not understand, but now you do. You have suffered the consequences of your pride and your cruelty. Now you must understand what it means to truly repent. The pain you feel now, that is only a glimpse of the suffering you caused." Rita nodded, her throat tight with remorse. "I've lost everything. I've lost my reputation, my relationships, my dignity. I don't know how to fix it, but I am willing to do whatever it takes. Please, tell me what I must do to make it right." The old woman studied her for a long moment, her face unreadable. "You have already begun, by seeking forgiveness, by facing the consequences. But now you must change. You must walk a new path, one of humility, kindness, and grace. You must offer your help to others, the way I tried to help you. You must rebuild your life, not out of selfishness or pride, but out of genuine love for others." Rita nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will, I promise. I will change. I will do whatever it takes." The old woman's expression softened even further, and she stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Rita's shoulder. "You are not beyond redemption, child. But remember this. True repentance comes not from words alone, but from actions. Let your actions show the sincerity of your remorse." With that, the old woman slowly began to fade away, the light around her growing dim. "Go, Rita. Leave this room and start your journey. Make it right." The transformation was complete, and the owl's cry echoed in the distance as the old beggar's spirit vanished into the night. Rita stayed on the floor for a long time, trying to absorb everything the woman had said. When the family finally came to retrieve her, they found her changed. The anger in their eyes softened when they saw the sincerity in her gaze. They allowed her to leave the village, but not without giving her one last warning: go and make amends. Live your life the right way. As she traveled back to the city, Rita's heart was lighter than it had been in weeks. She still had a long road ahead of her, but now she was determined to walk it. She would no longer let her pride or arrogance control her. Determined to change, Rita sought out an elderly woman in the city, one known for her wisdom and kindness, someone the community deeply respected. One afternoon, after gathering enough courage, she approached the woman, her head bowed in humility. "Ma," Rita began, her voice trembling with sincerity, "I have done terrible things in my life. My arrogance and pride have brought me nothing but pain and regret. I hurt someone who only tried to help me, and I lost everything because of it." The elderly woman studied her with a piercing gaze, sensing the weight of Rita's confession. "Child," she said gently, "recognizing your faults is the first step, but real change takes time, patience, and effort. Are you truly ready for that?" Tears welled up in Rita's eyes as she knelt before the woman. "I am ready," she whispered. "Please, I beg you, teach me how to be better. Teach me how to become tolerant, respectful, humble, and kind." The elderly woman nodded thoughtfully. "Very well," she said, "I will guide you, but you must be willing to do the hard work yourself." And so Rita began her journey of self-improvement under the woman's mentorship. Every day, she practiced patience in situations where she once would have lashed out. She learned to listen rather than dominate conversations. She treated people with kindness, no matter their status. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration and old habits that tried to creep back in, but she was determined. Piece by piece, Rita rebuilt her life. She reconnected with old friends she had alienated with her harsh words, offering heartfelt apologies. Some forgave her, others did not, but she accepted it with grace, understanding that trust takes time to rebuild. One day, inspired by the memory of the old beggar woman and the lessons she had learned, Rita decided to give back to the community in a meaningful way. With the little money she had left and the support of a few kind-hearted individuals, she started a small charity to help those in need, especially the poor and elderly. She named it the blind woman's gift in honor of the old beggar who had taught her the most valuable lesson of her life. The charity provided food, clothing, and shelter to the less fortunate, and Rita found a deep sense of fulfillment in serving others. As the charity grew, so did Rita's reputation, not as the arrogant and rude woman she once was, but as someone who had transformed her life and was now a beacon of kindness and generosity. One day, while overseeing a food distribution event, Rita saw a young girl standing timidly at the edge of the crowd, her eyes filled with hunger and uncertainty. Rita approached her with a warm smile and gently handed her a plate of food. As the girl looked up at her with gratitude, Rita felt something deep inside her: peace. She realized that true fulfillment came not from wealth or status, but from love, humility, and service to others. The owl's cries had long since stopped haunting her nights, replaced now by the laughter of children and the grateful smiles of those she helped. Though she could never undo the past, she had finally found a way to honor the old beggar's memory, by living a life of kindness and humility. And for the first time in a long time, Rita felt truly free.